Hello Planeswalkers, this is Eric again from Bane Alley Magic, bringing you another Commander Deck Tech video. Today we're talking about a card spoiled from the up-and-coming War of the Sparks set, Tolsimir, Friend to Wolves. But before we do, a quick reminder, if you like this video and you hit that like button or that subscribe button, that would be awesome. So Tolsimir is 2 green and a white for a 3/3 legendary elf scout that says when Tolsimir, Friend to Wolves, enters the battlefield, create Voha, Friend to Elves, a legendary 3/3 green and white wolf creature token. Whenever a wolf enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life, and that creature fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So they haven't spoiled the Voha, Friend to Elves creature token yet, so this is one I just made up myself. So for 6 mana, you get 2 bodies, 6 power, you gain 3 life, and you can potentially remove one of your opponent's smaller creatures. That's great value. And that is exactly the type of wolf commander that I've been waiting for. Unfortunately, werewolves do not work much with the deck, but there are actually some pretty amazing wolves anyway, so that's not much of a big deal that werewolves don't synergize well. The win condition of the deck is mostly to get as many wolves out as we can and overrun the opponent. In the process of doing so, we are also going to be gaining a lot of life and making our wolves fight our opponent's creatures. Wolves are not the toughest creatures, so often making them fight will also mean killing them, so we have lots of ways to pump up our wolves and even prevent the damage that would be dealt to them. So, the deck has 30 creatures including Tolsimir himself, 16 of which are wolves, 10 of which are elves, and 8 of the creatures are creatures that can make wolf tokens, and there are also 3 more permanents in the deck that can make wolf tokens, so in total we have 27 ways to get wolves on the battlefield. Now, mentioning on the battlefield, Tolsimir has 2 enter the battlefield triggers, so I think it's really important that we talk about the card Panharmonicon. So, Panharmonicon is 4 mana for an artifact that says if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So, Tolsimir's abilities are both going to trigger twice if you have Panharmonicon on the battlefield, because his first ability triggers when he himself enters the battlefield, and the next ability triggers when a wolf creature enters the battlefield. So, if you have Panharmonicon out and you cast Tolsimir, first off, you're going to be making 2 legendary wolf creature tokens named Voha. Now, I know you're going to have to sacrifice one of those tokens, but both of those tokens are still going to get the next Enter the Battlefield effect, which is you gain 3 life and you may have that creature fight up to 1 target creature you don't control. Well, those creatures entering the battlefield are now going to gain you 6 life, and you may have them fight up to 2 creatures you don't control if you have Panharmonicon out. So Panharmonicon really works great in this deck, and moving forward, just keep your eyes open for cards that have Enter the Battlefield triggers. All of those are going to have their triggers doubled if we can get Panharmonicon out. We also have a way to search up Panharmonicon. We also have Conjurer's Closet, which is just another artifact that works great with Enter the Battlefield effects. So Conjurer's Closet is 5 mana for an artifact that says at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So at the end of every one of your turns, you get to bounce something, as we say, and bring it back and get that Enter the Battlefield effect again. If you happen to get Panharmonicon and Conjurer's Closet out, you're in really good shape. So, next we have our creatures, starting with the non-wolf creatures, starting with some non-wolf creatures anyway. We're kind of going in order of converted mana cost. So, Mayor of Averbrook is 1 and a green for a 1/1 human advisor werewolf that says other humans you control get +1/+1, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Mayor of Averbrook, which transforms into Howlpack Alpha, which is a 3/3 werewolf that says other werewolf and wolf creatures you control get +1/+1. At the beginning of your end step, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. At the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Howlback Alpha back into Mayor of Averbrook. So, Mayor of Averbrook is meh. We don't really like it at all. What we want is Howlpack Alpha. We only have, literally one other human in the deck. I think, I don't think any more than one other human. And so, what we really want is to always have Howlpack Alpha side. So, if possible, there's kind of nothing you can do to control it, If you get it to Howlpack Alpha, you're great. I don't think it's something your opponents are going to be planning around much, but if you are ahead in the game and you are winning the game, then they are going to start planning around it and making sure that they're always casting spells so that Mayor of Averbrook doesn't transform into Howlpack Alpha. That's just something you have to accept. But if you cast it early on enough, early on in the game, I don't think it's much of a threat that your opponents are going to be looking out for and trying to get rid of compared to other things. And so it can get you potentially a few green wolf creature tokens onto the battlefield, and that is mainly why it's here. Continuing on, we have Metallic Mimic, 2 mana for a 2/1 Shapeshifter. As Metallic Mimic enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it. So Metallic Mimic pretty much goes in every single, tribal deck that needs an extra piece, which we do. We also include the Shapeshifters because we need extra wolves. There are other wolves I haven't included in the deck because, they just don't offer enough or they're too much mana, things like that, obviously. But Metallic Mimic is actually really great, having all of our wolves enter the battlefield with additional +1/+1 counters. Haha, there it is. So if we have Panharmonicon, they're going to be entering the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters, which is really sweet because we want them to survive. There's lots of ways we have in the deck to pump up our wolves. It's just really important because otherwise they are going to be dying to those fight triggers. We don't have to make them fight, but we want them to fight, of course, Alright, next we have Mirror Entity, 2 and a white for a 1/1 Shapeshifter that has Changeling. This card is every creature type, so this is in fact an elf and a wolf and a minotaur and a dragon and whatever you want it to be. And you can pay X. Until the end of the turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness of XX and gain all creature types. So if you have tons of mana, you can make all of your creatures really huge, and that can just, really win you the game actually pretty easily with this card. But also what's really important is it can turn all of your creatures into wolves. Yeah, all of your creatures have all creature types, so they're all wolves, and, that can potentially synergize with a couple other cards in the deck. Next we have Adaptive Automaton, 3 mana for a 2/2 construct. As Adaptive Automaton enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Adaptive Automaton is the chosen type in addition to its other types, and other creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. So this is our other Wolf Lord here, pumping up all of our wolves. Next we have Farhaven Elf, 2 and a green for a 1/1 Elf Druid. When Farhaven Elf enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So if we have Panharmonicon out, we can search our library for up to 2 lands. I originally had other non-creature spells that were ramping in this deck, but I figured, if we're running Panharmonicon, we might as well go all out and try to get some creatures that have some more enter the battlefield effects. But on top of that, actually, we do have one card in the deck that really cares about elves. So all of our changelings happen to be elves, and we happen to include a few other elves here, so we'll see that soon. First we have our wolves. Yes, the first of the actual wolves is here, starting with Witch Stalker, 1 and 2 green for a 3/3 wolf, which has a huge head, and it has hexproof, and whenever an opponent casts a blue or black spell during your turn, put a 1/1 counter on Witch Stalker. So that is pretty awesome. Someone's trying to remove your stuff or trying to counter your spells. As long as Witch Stalker's already out, it gets +1/+1 counters. And yeah, it has hexproof. Hexproof is really important because we just want our things to stick around. It's one of the better abilities on Commander, I think. Next we have Sacred Wolf, 2 and a green for a 3/1 wolf with hexproof. Again, hexproof I just think is a great ability because removal is so huge, and just being able to have a creature that sticks around can potentially just win you the game in the end, get in those extra points of damage. Next we have Silver Fur Partisan, 2 and a green for a 2/2 wolf warrior with trample. And it has, bipedalism, apparently, just like Wolfear Avenger. And whenever a wolf or werewolf you control becomes a target of an instant or sorcery spell, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. So this is one of our wolf creature token making creatures. And yeah, it's just another decent wolf. Not game breaking for sure, but it's at least repeatable. That's what I like about it. It's a wolf creature token engine that can potentially get us a lot of creatures, but of course it means that also our creatures have to suddenly become targets. But yeah, it at least means we get to replace our creatures when they become targets. Wolfear Avenger, 1 and 2 green for a 3/3 wolf warrior with flash, and you can pay 1 and a green to regenerate Wolfear Avenger. So if you don't know, regenerate means that if the creature would die, or the next time the creature would die, instead it doesn't die, and you tap it and you remove it from combat. So that's what regenerate means. So it's a creature that can stick around, and that's really important when we're having them fight when they enter the battlefield. So that regenerate ability works really well with Tolsimir, because instead of dying, it's just going to fight the creatures, and we can regenerate it if we have an extra 2 mana around. Next, we got Wood Elves, 2 and a green for a 1/1 elf scout. When Wood Elves enters the battlefield, search your library for a forest card and put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Again, if we got Panharmonicon, that's 2 forests. Next we have Selvala, Explorer Returned, 1 a green and a white for a 2/4 elf scout with Parlay. You may tap Selvala, and each player reveals the top card of his or her library. For each non-land card revealed this way, add a green mana to your mana pool, and you gain 1 life. Then each player draws a card. So Selvala is mostly in here to help us ramp. It's also another elf, which is going to be coming up very soon, why we want the elves in the deck. But yeah, also draws this card, maybe gets us some points politically on the table because we're allowing everyone to draw a card, and gains us a little bit of life. So not bad for a mono ramp spell. Next we have Spirit of the Hunt, 1 and 2 green for a 3/3 wolf spirit with flash. When Spirit of the Hunt enters the battlefield, each other creature you control that's a wolf or werewolf gets +0/+3 until the end of the turn. So +0/+3 is great. It just, really helps our creatures survive those fight triggers. Of course, Spirit of the Hunt, it's gonna only, and it's not gonna affect wolves entering the battlefield, but certainly what you can do is you cast another wolf, right? Have that wolf fight, and then while those triggers are on the stack, you then flash in Spirit of the Hunt, and that wolf gets +0/+3. If you have Panharmonicon, it's going to get +0/+6 before the fight happens. So that's how you could potentially save a wolf that's entering the battlefield and fighting with Tolsimir's ability. Next we have Beast Whisperer, 2 and 2 green for an elf druid that's a 2/3, and whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. This is just one of the best elves that's ever been printed, one of the best commander cards that's come out recently. Gotta have this card in any green creature deck. If you don't have one, get them now. Really great. Next we have Wilt Leaf Liege, 1 and 3 hybrid green-white mana for an Elf Knight. That's a 4/4, and it says other green creatures you control get +1/+1, and other white creatures you control get +1/+1. And if a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard Wilt Leaf Liege, put it onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your graveyard. So it has a little bit of protection from getting discarded, but this is just another really great lord for our green-white deck, pumping up all of our wolves. Next we have Pack Guardian, 2 and 2 green for a 4/3 wolf spirit with flash, and when Pack Guardian enters the battlefield, you may discard a land card. If you do, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. So if you happen to have a hand full of lands, you can discard up to 2 of them if you have Panharmonicon, and then get 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. So there's lots of Panharmonicon triggers that could go off here. If you happen to have Tolsimir, Panharmonicon, and these other wolves, you just get a ton of triggers. Pretty awesome. Next we have Wren's Run Packmaster, 3 and a green for a 5/5 elf warrior that says champion an elf. When this creature enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you exile another elf you control. When this creature leaves the battlefield, that card returns to the battlefield. For 2 and a green, you can create a 2/2 green wolf creature token, and finally, wolves you control have Death Touch. This is sick. This card is awesome in this deck, but unfortunately, we don't get it if we don't have an elf. Thankfully, our commander is an elf, so we can consistently have an elf on the battlefield to exile. And then, with our commander, we can actually just, recast it after it's been exiled and championed. But we do have several other elves in the deck. And if we happen to do it with something like Farhaven Elf, then we're going to get Farhaven Elves enter the battlefield trigger again when Wren's Run Packmaster leaves the battlefield. So pretty good synergy there with the elves entering the battlefield and the champion effect. But more importantly, this is a wolf creature token engine for just 3 mana. We get wolves. That is just fabulous value. And finally giving all of our wolves Death Touch. That is huge. I mean, that means automatically when they fight a creature with Tolsimir, they're going to be killing that creature. So Wren's Run Packmaster, absolutely essential in the Tolsimir deck, definitely. Unfortunately, keep in mind, the champion effect is also an enter the battlefield effect. So this is the downside, is if you have Panharmonicon out, you'll have to sacrifice Wren's Run Packmaster unless you exile 2 elves. So just try to keep this one away from Panharmonicon compared to everything else. Moving along, we got Chameleon Colossus, 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 changeling. So it's every creature type, it's an elf, and it's a wolf. And it has protection from black, and for 2 and 2 green, Chameleon Colossus gets +X until the end of the turn, where X is its power. So this is a wolf where we can just pump up its power, even in response to the fight trigger. Again, when so the fight trigger goes on the stack, and you can respond to that by doing things such as Chameleon Colossus's activated ability and pumping it up to make sure it survives the fight. So really cool elf. Really cool elf. Yeah, sure. Really cool wolf more than anything. Next we have Jazal Goldmane, 2 and 2 white for a 4/4 legendary creature cat warrior with first strike. And for 3 and 2 white, attacking creatures you control get +X till the end of the turn, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So this is sort of our low cast and budget version of Craterhoof Behemoth. Absolutely. I really want to build a mono white deck, and I'm thinking this might be the commander, because this effect is an effect that definitely wins games, especially with decks like ours that go wide. So, if you can afford a Craterhoof Behemoth, sure, go ahead. It's also a little bit expensive for our deck. We do have, only 37 lands in the deck, and I needed more elves. I needed more wolves. I needed more elves and wolves, so I didn't have room for Craterhoof Behemoth, really. But I kept Jazal Goldmane because it's only 4 mana, and this is the exact type of effect we need to just close out the game. Next we have Briar Pack Alpha, 3 and a green for a 3/3 wolf with flash, and when Briar Pack Alpha enters the battlefield, target creature gets +2/+2 until the end of the turn. So Briar Pack Alpha is a card that came out right around when I started playing Magic. I actually started during the Gate Crash set, but I remember after I started playing a little while, people were using Briar Pack Alpha on me a lot, just in my own play group among friends. We weren't that competitive, and it was a card that worked, just because it had Flash. Flash is such a great ability, just going on the stack and responding to something by saying, no, this creature gets +2/+2. But by the way, if you have Panharmonicon out, that creature is going to get +4/+4. That's pretty awesome. Next we have Master of the Wild Hunt, our other human in the deck. So it's 2 and 2 green for a 3/3 human shaman that says at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. And you can tap Master of the Wild Hunt and tap all untapped wolf creatures you control. Each wolf tapped this way deals damage equal to its power to target creature. That creature deals damage equal to its power, divided as its controller chooses among any number of those wolves. It's just another fight effect, so we do have some ways in the deck to, protect the wolves while they fight, so we'll come up to that later. Next we got Somberwald Alpha, 3 and a green for a 3/2 wolf. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, it gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn. And for 1 and a green, target creature you control gains trample until the end of the turn. So that +1/+1 again remains until the end of the turn, so if you happen to get some creatures blocked and they survive, then you can then use them with Master of the Wild Hunt with their new increased power. Things like that really help out with Master of the Wild Hunt and with Tolsimir. But Somberwald Alpha, it's, it could be better. I do wish there were some more good wolves in the deck, just like we all do, but as far as the wolves we have available, it's pretty good. It works. Next we have Karametra, God of Harvests, 3, a green and a white, for a 6/7 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible. As long as your devotion to green and white is less than 7, Karametra isn't a creature. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Well, this card is great for our deck. We do have a lot of creatures, like I said, 30 creatures. And it's on cast, so even if they counter the creature spell, we still get to search our library for a forest or plains card. As far as basic forests and plains, I know that we have 9 basic forests and 9 basic plains at least, on top of at least 3 forest plains. So that's already 21 different forests and plains we can search out with Karametra. So she's not going to run out, is basically what I'm trying to get at. Next we have Kessig Cagebreakers, 4 and a green for a 3/4 human rogue. Whenever Kessig Cagebreakers attacks, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token that's tapped and attacking for each creature card in your graveyard. So, again, it's a wolf token maker that's repeatable, that can potentially make a lot of wolves, and that's what we like about it. It can make wolves over and over again. Next we have Scala Wolf, 3 and 2 green for a 3/3 wolf spirit, and when Scala Wolf enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a green card from among them and put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Wow, this is actually super good compared to other cards like this, that, you can look at the top 5 cards of your library and look for only one really specific type of card, but in a 2-color deck, the odds that we're going to reveal a green card is like 50-50, out of 5? Gosh, how can we not reveal a green card off of this, actually? I think this is not going to whiff more times than not. You're actually going to be able to get a card off of this, which I think is really important. More important than that, Panharmonicon. If you have that out, this trigger happens twice. Yeah, you get to look at the top 5 covers of your library, put one into your hand, a green one into your hand, put the rest on the bottom, and then you get to do it again. Excellent. Next we have Wolfear Spirit Heart. I did it again. Wow. I always call this card Spirit Heart for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe they should just change it because I wanted to. No, I don't know. It's Wolfir Silver Heart. 3 and 2 green for a 4/4 Wolf Warrior with Soulbound. So you may pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enters the battlefield, and they remain paired as long as you control both of them. As long as Wolfir's Silver Heart is paired with another creature, each of those creatures gets +4/+4. So even though it has an enter the battlefield effect, it's not going to be, it's not going to matter that it's doubled. But what's really cool is for 5 mana, you get an 8/8. That's great. And you get to pump something up. So for 5 mana, you're potentially getting 12 power on the battlefield. Yeah. Wolfir Silver Heart goes in a lot of green decks, actually, so it's great that it has a really solid home here. I mean, right when this enters the battlefield, you can give it +4/+4, and then have it fight something with Tolsimir. That's pretty awesome. Next, we have Fang of the Pack. 5 and a green for a 5/3 wolf with melee. So whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn for each opponent you attack that attacked with a creature this combat. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains melee until the end of the turn. So if a creature has multiple instances of melee, each triggers separately. Sorry, this card is kind of a tongue twister. But yeah, this 5/3 wolf basically can get really big in a multiplayer game. If you're attacking all of your opponents in a 4-player game, then this is potentially going to get you, it gets +1 for each opponent you attack with a creature this turn. So yeah, even in a 1v1 game, it's at least going to be getting +1/+1 for the opponent it is attacking. But yeah, if you're attacking all 3 of your opponents, it gets +3/+3. And it also gives another target creature you control melee. So it could give another target creature you control potentially +3/+3. Next we have Howlgeist. 5 and a green for a 4/2 Spirit Wolf. And creatures you control with power less than Howlgeist's power can't block it. And Howlgeist has Undying, so when this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it, so then it becomes a 5/3. So Howlgeist is just a pretty great value as far as getting in that extra damage and having a creature that enters the battlefield twice. So sure, it doesn't have its own enter the battlefield trigger, but it enters the battlefield twice, which is going to trigger multiple things in the deck, including our commander. Next we have Vigor. 3 and 3 green for a 6/6 Elemental Incarnation with Trample. If damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage. Put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented this way. When Vigor is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. Yeah, this card is perfect for this deck. We have a fight deck. Vigor goes in any fight deck. Any deck you have that's like based around the fight mechanic, you want Vigor, because Vigor means your creature's never going to die from the fight mechanic. Your creature's just going to get bigger. So that is awesome. Vigor is just perfect with Tolsimir, having our wolves fight the other creatures and having the damage prevented that would be dealt to them, but instead, you put that many +1/+1 counters on them. And again, Vigor, if it ever goes to a graveyard, you just shuffle it back so it sticks around. Really cool creature. Really great friend to Tolsimir for sure. Speaking of Tolsimir, we got the next Tolsimir Wolfblood. 4 and a green and a white for a 3/4 legendary elf warrior that says other green creatures you control get +1/+1, and other white creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can tap it to create a legendary 2/2 green and white wolf creature token named Voha. So what I love about this is it works really well with Tolsimir Friend of Wolves in that the wolf token that it makes is not the same wolf token that Tolsimir Friend of Wolves makes, so you can have both the tokens out on the battlefield at the same time too. Tolsimir Wolfblood pumps up Tolsimir Friend of Wolves and all your other wolves, so yeah, definitely a must-have in this deck. Next we have our non-creature spells. So, moving into the non-creature spells, we're going to start with what I consider to be the best anthem in the whole game, Beastmaster Ascension. 2 and a green for an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension, and as long as Beastmaster Ascension has 7 or more counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. Yeah, +5/+5 for 3 mana, giving all of your creatures +5/+5. Yes, it has to have 7 or more quest counters on it, but if you attack with 7 creatures, those quest counters go on it right away, and right away all 7 of those creatures get +5/+5 before combat damage is dealt or anything like that. So Beastmaster Ascension is not too hard to get off, and especially like a deck like ours, which is kind of trying to go wide with some tokens. So yeah, absolutely essential with this deck. And you know, that'll give our wolves, by the way, the +5/+5, so as they enter the battlefield, they're gonna have that +5/+5 and be able to survive the fights they're getting into, and also be able to kill the creature they're fighting much more easily. Next we have Sword of Body and Mind, 3 mana for an artifact equipment, which has equip for 2, and it says equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from green and from blue, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield, and that player puts the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Sword of Body and Mind makes wolf creature tokens. Yeah, that's awesome. So this is a wolf creature token generator that is repeatable. I mean, how often do you think of Sword and Body and Mind? How often do you think wolves? You know, you're always thinking pro green blue, making them mill 10 cards. But yeah, it really goes well in this deck because it not only does all that, but it also makes a wolf creature token. That's awesome. Gotta love the wolf creature tokens. Definitely want to equip Tolsimir with this as soon as possible to give him some protection. If you take anything out of this deck, you know, maybe make some room for other things that can give Tolsimir protection, but mostly we're protecting him by pumping him up huge. Next we have Wolfcaller's Howl, 3 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, create X 2/2 green wolf creature tokens, where X is the number of your opponents with 4 or more cards in their hands. So this is really good in Commander. If you have 3 opponents, you can potentially be making 3 2/2 wolf creature tokens at every upkeep. That's awesome. You can have them all fight creatures. You're going to be gaining 9 life then if you have Tolsimir on the battlefield. 18 life if you have Tolsimir and Panharmonicon. Yeah, the possibilities are huge. Wolfcaller's Howl, great card. Next we have Feed the Pack, 5 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a non-token creature. If you do, put X 2/2 green wolf creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is the sacrifice creature's toughness. Feed the Pack feeds itself is the great thing. No, it doesn't. Never mind. Sorry. It says non-token creature. My bad. But Feed the Pack is an awesome card just to be able to grow a little army of wolf creature tokens at any end step of your choosing. You know, as long as you have a big enough creature that you don't care about, then you can make 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. And, you know, we also have lots of, you know, extra elves that we don't mind sacrificing to the pack. You know, they'll understand. They don't mind. Next we have Enlightened Tutor, 1 white for an instant. Search your library for an artifact or enchantment card and reveal that card. Shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. Well, most of the time we're going to be searching for Panharmonicon, but maybe Sword of Body and Mind, you know, any number of choices as you'll see coming up. Next we have Altar of Bone, 1 white and 1 green. For a sorcery, sacrifice a creature to look through your library for a creature card, put that card into your hand after showing it to all other players, and reshuffle your library afterwards. So this can get any number of choices. I think a lot of the time you might be getting Jazal Goldmane, so you can close out the game by just pumping all of your creatures huge. Next we have Culling Dais, 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to sacrifice a creature and put a charge counter on it, or you can pay 1 and sacrifice Culling Dais and draw a card for each counter on for each charge counter on Culling Dais. So Culling Dais doesn't seem that great, but I've actually used it in sacrifice decks before, and it works really good. Being able to sacrifice one thing a turn isn't a lot of things to sacrifice, but very often you only need to sacrifice like one thing a turn. And this is just in the deck as a sack outlet. If someone's trying to gain control of our things, if someone's trying to exile our things, or enchant our things, or make copies of our things, often instead we will choose to sacrifice those things. So having a couple sacrifice outlets is really important pretty much for any commander deck. But Culling Dais is great because it can also end up drawing you a ton of cards in the long run. And it has drawn me a ton of cards. I think it does work pretty well. Next we have Evolutionary Leap, 1 and a green for an enchantment, and it says you can pay 1 green to sacrifice a creature, and then reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order, or in a random order. So Evolutionary Leap is a really fabulous sacrifice outlet, not too expensive either, and it's only 2 to cast as well. Yeah, just great for any green deck. As soon as your creature is about to get destroyed, hey, sacrifice it instead, and you get another creature into your hand. A really great card value here. Evolutionary Leap. Next we have our ramp spells, starting with Soul Ring. Then we have Selesnya Signet, 2 mana for an artifact, which you can pay 1 and tap it to get both green and a white. So it's not necessarily an artifact that just taps to add 2 mana to your mana pool, because you still have to pay 1 to activate it. So it's more of a mana fixer. It does ramp you as well, of course, but just remember, some newer players sometimes forget that they have to pay the 1 to activate it. Next we have Growing Rites of Itlimoc, 2 and a green for a legendary enchantment. When Growing Rites of Itlimoc enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform Growing Rites of Itlimoc into Itlimoc, Cradle of the Sun, which is a legendary land that taps to add a green mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it to add green mana to your mana pool for each creature you control. So this is our new version of Gaia's Cradle, which nobody can afford anymore on a reasonable budget. Anyway, so Growing Rites of Itlimoc, just really great card, super cool. What more is there to say? It's a Gaia's Cradle. It can add tons of mana to your mana pool. Great for any green deck, really. Oftentimes it will whiff on looking at the top 4 cards of your library, but you know, whatever. Next we have Herald's Horn, 3 mana for an artifact that when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Creature spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. And at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. So obviously we're going to be choosing wolves here. You know, we only do have 16 wolves in the deck though, so you know, we're not going to be drawing a ton of wolves off of this, you know, a few a game at least probably, but definitely making all of our wolves 1 less to cast, really important. Path of Discovery is 3 and a green for an enchantment that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. So when it explores, you reveal the top card of your library, and you put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature, then put the card back, or put it into your graveyard. So what's really great about Path of Discovery in this deck is not only is it allowing us to explore with every creature and thereby potentially making it larger, but with Panharmonicon, again, we will get to explore twice with every creature, and that's just amazing. Next we have Mirari's Wake, 3, a green and a white for an enchantment that says creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So it doubles all of our lands and pumps up our whole team. Great. Next is Zendikar Resurgent, 5 and 2 green for an enchantment that says whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. So this is going to draw us tons of cards and add tons of mana to our mana pool. What I love about Zendikar Resurgent is it basically wins me games all the time. Next thing you know, you just have a whole army of creatures on the battlefield. You know, you have so much mana, you just have plenty of mana to cast all the creatures that you end up drawing. I mean, you do eventually, run out of mana, of course. But man, I mean, in one turn, this card can get you like 10 creatures on the battlefield, easily. Happens for me all the time. I mean, because, you gotta pay 7 to cast it, so at that point you already have 7 lands. Next turn, you could potentially have 8 lands, and that means you're gonna have 16 mana. And if any of that's to cast a creature, then you draw a spell, then you draw a card, and if that card's a creature, you get to cast it, and draw another card. You see what I'm saying? There's just a nice little loop there. The loop does end, of course, but, I mean, it's a loop that potentially wins you the game a lot. Next, we have Howling Mine. Hooo! 2 mana for an artifact. At the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. So, yeah, we are helping out our opponents a little bit, but it's only 2 mana, and we get to draw extra cards, and, white has trouble drawing cards, and green is okay at drawing cards, but it's not the greatest, and so, we really do need some things to help us draw cards to keep us in the game. So even if it means our opponents are drawing cards, big deal. Our creatures are going to be bigger and better anyway, so we don't care. And, Howling Mine, I mean, it's a wolf deck, you gotta have Howling Mine. Next we have Lifecrafter's Bestiary. 3 mana for an artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. So don't forget that trigger. You want to scry 1 every turn. That is huge. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you may pay 1 green. If you do, you get to draw a card. So this can draw you a card every time you cast a creature spell, as long as you have 1 extra green to pay. And oftentimes you do. I mean, you think of this like the extort trigger. How often does that, white-black player have an extra mana to pay into their extort trigger? Well, all the time. So if that's what you want to compare it to here, you will have that extra green mana all the time as well. Next we have Harmonize, 2 and 2 green for a sorcery that says draw 3 cards. That is a nice solid card draw for green. Next we have Guardian Project, 3 and a green for a card that should pretty much go into any green commander deck that runs creatures. So Guardian Project is an enchantment, and it says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, you draw a card. So in Commander, that's literally every single creature you cast is going to draw you a card. So that is huge, but even better in our deck, it's an enter the battlefield effect, so we're going to be drawing a ton of cards. Of course, it doesn't work with tokens after you have the first token, because tokens technically do have the same name as each other. So, I mean, I guess it isn't exactly every creature that you get is going to draw you a card, but at least the first token that you get of that name is going to draw you a card, and every single non-token creature is going to definitely draw you a card, and again, with Panharmonicon, you're going to be drawing 2 cards. Next we have Vanquisher's Banner, 5 mana for an artifact. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1, and whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, you draw a card. So, that's going to be drawing us some cards off of the wolves and pumping all of our wolves up at the same time. Pretty sweet. Next we have the Immortal Sun, 6 mana for a legendary artifact that says players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And finally, creatures you control get +1/+1. Yes, there's a lot of abilities here, but they are all really good with our deck, especially the first one, because guess what? We're not running any Planeswalkers in the deck at all. Not even Arlen, not even the new Arlen. I don't think she's just good enough. She even though she does make some wolves, and maybe we do need some more wolf token generating things, I think taking out the Immortal Sun to put in Planeswalkers would be a bad idea with this deck. This card just does a lot of work with this deck, so I think it goes super well. And again, we need to make up for the fact that there aren't enough really good wolf creatures out there themselves, There's some decent ones, but I mean, there's not a lot of game-breaking wolf creatures out there, so we need things like the Immortal Sun to make up for it, for sure. Next, we have our removal spells, starting with Path to Exile, 1 white. For an instant, exile target creature. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle his or her library. Next is Swords to Plowshares, 1 white. For an instant, exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. So these two spells are just, probably the most powerful one-drop removal spells in the whole game across multiple formats, but still in Commander, absolutely. Being able to exile something and just giving your opponent a land or gaining them some life is really great value for just 1 white mana, definitely. Next we have Aura Shards, 1, a green and a white. For an enchantment, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. So if you have Panharmonicon out, that's 2 artifacts or 2 enchantments. And Aura Shards just does really tons of work in this deck. We have a lot of creatures entering the battlefield, some of them entering the battlefield multiple times. I mean, if you've ever played with this card, you know it basically means your opponents don't get to have artifacts or enchantments. So Settle the Wreckage is 2 and 2 white for an instant that says exile all attacking creatures target player controls. That player may search his or her library for that many basic land cards, put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle his or her library. This is just fabulous at stopping someone who's about to win the game with something like Craterhoof Behemoth, or, maybe Triumph of the Hordes, giving all of their creatures infect or something like that. Having Settle the Wreckage open just does wonders, really, works like the super fog. It's going to prevent all the combat damage that's going to be dealt to you. It's going to exile those creatures. Just great value. Next we have Cleansing Nova, 3 and 2 white for a sorcery, and it says choose 1. Either destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Next we have Fumigate, 3 and 2 white for a sorcery, that says destroy all creatures. You gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. Next is Orim's Chant, 1 white for an instant, which has Kicker for 1 white, so you can pay an extra white as you play this. And it says target player can't play spells this turn, and if you paid the Kicker cost, creatures can't attack this turn. So this is a nice little fog, and it's also a silence, so it prevents your opponent from comboing off and winning the game. And if you're about to win the game, it's also nice to cast just to prevent someone else from, Settle the Wreckaging you, something like that. Next we have Praetor's Council, 5 and 3 green for a sorcery that says return all cards from your graveyard to your hand, then you exile Praetor's Council. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So Praetor's Council is just really sweet after a late game where we've had a ton of board wipes, all of our stuff's gone away, we get it all back to our hand, and we have no maximum hand size, so we don't have to discard any of it. Next we have Eldrazi Monument, 5 mana for an artifact that says creatures you control get +1/+1, have flying, and indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. If you can't, you gotta sacrifice Eldrazi Monument. So we are losing a creature every turn, but hopefully we have those repeatable wolf engines so we can just get an extra wolf token out every turn to sacrifice. And there you go. All of our creatures get +1/+1 flying and indestructible. Very game ending right there. Next we have Faith's Reward, 3 and a white for an instant that says return to the battlefield all permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So this will save your board from a board wipe and get you all those enter the battlefield effects again. And it says all permanents, so even if someone destroys, all non-land permanents, you get all those things back with Faith's Reward. That's pretty sweet. And that's it. That brings us to our lands. So, starting with the lands that make colorless mana, we have Gavany Township. It taps for a colorless, or you can pay 2, a green and a white, and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So, pretty sweet. It's a land that's also an anthem. Next we have Temple of the False God, which is a land that taps to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. If you think this card's bad, think again. It's a really great card in Commander because we're playing a long game format, and that means it's a format that if you don't end up having 5 or more lands, then you're probably just going to end up losing anyway. I've never had Temple of the False God not work, personally. Whenever I get it out, I'm always stoked. It always ends up eventually working. You know, there are those occasions where you're mana screwed and you only got Temple of the False God and 2 other lands. Well, I mean, in that situation, you're just basically mana screwed anyway, and it wouldn't have helped you out that much more if it was just a basic land. So I feel like, you know, in those situations, you're losing anyway. So Temple of the False God is overall a really good card in Commander. Next we have High Market, which is a land that taps to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it to sacrifice a creature and gain 1 life. Just another nice little sacrifice outlet on a land. Then we have Reliquary Tower, taps to add a colorless, and it says we have no maximum hand size. I've had people say that I put this in too many decks, you know, our decks don't draw enough cards, but I think it is useful to have it against, you know, decks that just could potentially be running Jin Gitaxias or something like that. Next we have Secluded Steppe, which is a land that enters tapped. It taps to add 1 white to our mana pool, or we can cycle it away for 1 white. So we can pay a white to discard it and then draw a card. So if we had too much mana already, and then we drew this card, it's really convenient to have at least a few lands in the deck that you can cycle away when you're mana flooded. Same with Tranquil Thicket. It's a land that enters tapped. It taps to add a green, or we can cycle it away for 1 green mana. Then we have Jungle Basin. It's a land that enters tapped. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return an untapped forest you control to its owner's hand, and Jungle Basin taps to add both a colorless mana and a green mana to your mana pool. So this is a land that's going to tap to add 2 mana to your mana pool. And this land isn't, you know, fabulous, but it's actually pretty good. If you think about it like this, if you think about a card such as Farseek, you know, a green spell that's 1 and a green to cast, you know, you're basically spending 2 mana to get an extra land onto the battlefield, right? That's what Farseek does. Well, Jungle Basin is almost doing the same thing. You're spending 2 lands to net yourself 1 extra land on the battlefield in the long run. Not right away, because you do have to return a land to your hand. Basically, cards like Jungle Basin and Karoo are like 2 land drops in 1. And if you know anything about Commander, having a land drop every turn is really important, you know, just to be consistently playing a land every turn. And so Jungle Basin and Karoo, they're the same card. Karoo's the white version. They give you that extra land drop that you need throughout the game. And eventually they end up netting you an extra land, because you always end up at that point where you are missing a land drop. And so these are lands that are going to net you extra lands. And especially if you have some cards like Wayward Swordtooth or something that allow you to play extra lands, these cards just become so much better. So if you haven't tried them out yet, give them a shot. I think they're actually pretty cool, and they've worked for me really well in the past. Next we have Krosan Verge, a land that enters tapped. It taps to add 1 to your mana pool, or you can pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice it to search your library for a forest card and a plains card and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. That's right, I didn't just say a forest or a plains, I said a forest and a plains. Believe it or not, this is like the only card in Magic the Gathering that does this, and it does it for green-white. What do you know? So yeah, it enters tapped, but Krosan Verge, I mean, this uncommon ends up getting you a forest or a plains, and so what you'll see next, we have 3 forest plains in the deck. It doesn't say basic forest or plains. Those lands are going to enter the battlefield tapped, but so what? I mean, that's just great value on a land. I think it's a super cool card. So next we got Temple Garden, our forest plains, which means it is going to tap for green or white. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you pay 2 life. Not a bad deal. Next we have Canopy Vista, our forest plains that enters tapped unless you have 2 or more basic lands. And finally, we got Scattered Groves, our forest plains, which enters tapped, and we can cycle it away for 2 mana. Not a bad deal either. Next, we have Selesnya Sanctuary, which enters tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and Selesnya Sanctuary taps to add both a green and a white mana to your mana pool. So just like our other bounce lands, same thing. This ends up being 2 land drops in one. Great value. It's a little bit of ramp on a land. And so what if we used 2 lands? You know, we had to return a land to our hand, and this land had to enter the battlefield tapped. So it's as if we used 2 lands to ramp a little bit, but we also didn't cast a spell to do it. So I feel like it's almost better. But it's not exactly ramp per se in that it gives you extra land on the battlefield immediately, but in the long run it does, so I think it's really cool. Just remember, too, that if these are in your opening hand and you have to return things back to your hand, you might have to discard. So keep that in mind. Next, we have Wooded Bastion, which is a land that taps to add a colorless, or you can pay a white or a green and tap it to add either green-green, green-white, or white-white to your mana pool. So a nice little mana-fixing land here. Then we have Fortified Village, which is a land that, as it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a forest or plains card from your hand. If you don't, it enters tapped, and it taps to add either green or white to your mana pool. Next we have Sungrass Prairie, which is a land with which you can pay 1 and tap it to add both green and white to your mana pool. So this is actually a signet on a land. Pretty sweet. Then we have Sunpetal Grove, which enters tapped unless you already control a forest or a plains, and it taps to add green or white to your mana pool. We have Razor Verge Thicket, which enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands, so it's an early game land, otherwise it'll enter tapped, and it taps to add white or green to your mana pool. Finally, we have Bountiful Promenade, which enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and it taps to add green or white to your mana pool. So if you're playing Commander, we're playing a multiplayer game, so this is always going to be entering the battlefield untapped, unless it's like, just down to you and one other person, of course. And then we, of course, have 9 plains and 9 forests, and that's our 40 cards. That is my Tolsimir Friend to Wolves deck. Let me know what you think. Let me know if we need more wolves. Let me know what wolves you would put in, what you would take out, what other cards you would put in. I think we did a pretty good job here, though, and I think this deck is actually pretty competitive, and I think this is just what us wolf players really wanted. I know my buddy Ian is freaking out right now over this deck. And that brings us to the end. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit that like button or that subscribe button. It would really help out a lot. This is Eric from Bane Alley Magic signing off. Until next time, take care, take it easy.